Welcome to Quickshot, the video game fact show for you to watch whilst you wait for Streets of Rage 5. Surely it's going to happen soon, right? Right? Guys? Well, no matter how long it takes, you got plenty of other games in the same genre to play, including a whole heap of retro-infused titles that I'm pretty sure you've never even heard of. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, possibly the first ever Polish Streets of Rage ripoff that could possibly make you forget about Streets of Rage 5. Now, have you ever played a newly discovered game and halfway through said game thought to yourself, I can't believe that this is real? Sure, it could be down to strange gameplay or bizarre presentation causing the experience to remain ungrounded and seemingly just beyond reach intellectually, and occasionally this can lead to an incredibly creative, positive experience such as Octodad or Untitled Goose Game. Other times, the experience is unforgettable for all of the wrong reasons. Trying to play Franko the Crazy Revenge is definitely one of those times. As stated, the game takes some rather obvious signs of inspiration from beat-em-ups like Double Dragon and Streets of Rage, obviously, but frankly, Franko the Crazy is an interesting example of a game whose reception in different regions around the world was completely at odds with the reputation in its home country.
Let's go!
Franko was first let loose on the Amiga in 1994 with a DOS port following a couple of years later. Before going any further, it's important to note a few truths about the title to give it a little bit of context. It was one of the earlier examples of a game developed in Poland at a time when the development community looked significantly different to the way it is now. It also spent a bit of time on the shelf whilst the developers were looking for a publisher. It had supposedly been finished in late 1992, but it took until about 1994 for the game to finally make it out to the public. And now that that's all out the way, we can be blunt. Franko feels awful to actually play. This is due to a confluence of poor presentation, frustrating technical issues, and a control scheme that has to be experienced to be believed. So this is where we're going to be starting. As an Amiga title first and foremost, the game was always going to have to be built around that system's primary gaming control option, the joystick. Now, most new joysticks released for the format only had the maximum of 2 buttons available, but even that was a luxury that couldn't be assumed. Many people were still using their cheap old Atari 2600 joysticks thanks to the backwards compatibility offered by the Amiga, and they only had a single button. And as a result, Franko's control scheme has to be crunched down to work based on the directional stick and that single action button. Now, holding that single button while stationary begins your character's standing combo, whilst pressing it in combination with a direction triggers other movements such as jump kick and a backwards punch. It makes the whole game feel like you're trying to move your character via a remote control. They never quite do what you want them to do, and when you finally do manage to make them move, you soon remember that the aim of the game is to actually beat up the bad guys, which is a whole other level of frustration. It should be clear from the footage that you're seeing here so far that Franko is not exactly a pretty game. The sprite work is extremely crude and the whole thing feels like it's been lifted directly out of the fever dreams of an overly excited 11-year-old. There's a lot of graffiti, blood and other sorts of fairly juvenile visuals on display here, with enemies splattered on the ground after they are defeated, and a general ugliness to the game that seems to be equal parts intentional and unintentional. Animations are threadbare, with most attacks only featuring a handful of frames at best. Ironically, the Amiga actually struggles to handle this game despite the relatively simple graphics, supposedly due to the way the backgrounds were actually programmed. This results in choppy scrolling and frequent short pauses to load.
Let's go!
And the audio is also repetitive to the extreme. The soundtrack sounds surprisingly good at first, and then you quickly realise that the music is genuinely a loop of about 10 seconds worth of music, and you'll want to tear your ears out soon after, especially since the stages are so long. There are some decent voice samples and impact effects, but they are also fairly limited and become grating after about 5 minutes of play. It all looks bad in isolation, but it only gets worse when you start comparing it to other beat-em-ups. Take the Amiga port of Golden Axe for example, which was already released a couple of years before work had even started on Franko. That's not even counting other more powerful consoles that were also around about the same time in 1994. I mean, compare this to Streets of Rage 3, there's clearly no contest. This was the reaction of most players around the world who had little time for Franko when there was such a variety of better options available. But when you look past the technical issues and aesthetic challenges, there is a spark of something unique with this game. The backgrounds often reference pop culture of the era, as well as recognisable areas from Szczecin, the real-world Polish city where the game is set. This is where things actually become interesting. Whilst the outside world never warmed to Franko, the game actually received a very different reception within its home country. Local publications gave it fantastic scores, with Top Secret even calling it the Game of the Year for 1994. Yes, 1994, the same year as Super Metroid Earthworm Jim, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, Doom, Earthbound, Donkey Kong Country. Yeah, this game won Game of the Year. This game was a commercial success locally. Despite the delayed release, it seemed that there was a real appreciation in Poland for the homegrown product that gave an honest depiction of the urban environments there at the time. It was also accessible to those in Poland who may not have been able to play those other more popular beat-em-ups due to availability and cost. Even the way it was programmed, including the god-awful one-button control scheme, could be interpreted as an attempt to ensure that the game was playable by the vast majority. But looking at it now, Franko is definitely unique and still gives off a vibe that some may find weirdly appealing despite the substandard gameplay. The long stages and repetitive sound effects almost put you in a trance, making you forget about the other games in the genre and determined to see this one through. And because of all of this, even though you have very likely never heard of this title, the game actually still enjoys a cult status in Poland, providing fond memories for those who had an Amiga back in the day, and this is likely why there is actually a sequel coming soon. Yes, you heard that right. After a slow start due to some development issues, which seems fairly on brand if we're going to be honest, Franko's return is currently scheduled for a 2021 release. So yeah, like I said, who needs Streets of Rage 5, right? Right? Guys?